Will, thank you very much. I want to thank you for taking your time to meet with us at LoganSquare.TV. And I guess I just want to begin by asking you, we know Will Guzzardi, the Huffington Post reporter turned local politician who ran against Maria Barrios in 2012 in the Democratic primary. What is the Will Guzzardi that we don't know?
Well, it's funny being in public life. A lot of your life ends up being out there, and folks. I think the story of how I got involved in politics is one I've told before, and a really important one to me personally. I mean that the work that I was doing at the Huffington Post as a journalist is what took me to this political work, and there was one moment in particular that when I was doing my reporting that really brought me into politics, and it was a story I did about this group called the Healthy Hermosa Coalition. Hermosa being a neighborhood that's a little west of here.
Yeah.
And it's this tiny little organization of these tiny little neighborhood nonprofits, church groups and human service groups that were doing work in Hermosa. And I went to this meeting, I just showed up. I saw they were having a meeting, and I figured I would show up and sort of try to get my finger on the pulse of what was going on in the community there. And it was an incredibly eye-opening thing for me, because these organizations, first of all, were doing incredible work in that community, but second of all, were just desperate for resources from the state, and our state government wasn't providing those resources. They were 18 months behind on their reimbursements to these tiny little neighborhood nonprofits. And I remember these women who were running these organizations were talking about how long it had been since they'd taken a paycheck, because they just couldn't cut their services, and they were the only staff, so they just kept on working for free until the state would finally get its act together. And that story, writing that story, reporting that story, was probably the turning point for me in terms of realizing that I couldn't just keep sitting on the sidelines while state government was failing our community. That I couldn't just write about it. Yeah. I had to get involved in some sort of proactive way.
I know that you had volunteered for Jeremy Carpin's campaign in 2010. Was this the story with Hermosa? Was that after the Carpin campaign, or before, or at the same time?
I was also doing, because Huffington Post is a very small operation in Chicago, there were two of us at the time. I was covering all kinds of things, and I was writing about the nonprofit sector, but also covering politics. And yeah, I met Jeremy when I was reporting on that race in the 2010 general, and he was a really fascinating guy, a young guy who was working at the Mercy Home for Boys, and a social worker. My family's all social workers. My mom and my brother are both social workers, so I was sort of drawn to him for that reason. But that really, covering that race really opened my eyes about what was going on in Springfield and what our representation looked like in Springfield. I spoke with my now opponent, Tony Barrios, during that time as well, and just did some research and started to see what was going on, and that my opponent was really part and parcel, Jeremy's opponent at the time, part and parcel of this sort of entrenched political establishment in Springfield, and that was in a fundamental way connected to the problems that I saw at the Healthy Hermosa Coalition. That the broken system in Springfield was failing to deliver for the folks in my neighborhood and the folks who really needed it, and that making that connection, I think, was so you bring up an apt point. I think those two dots, connecting them, was really what got me thinking politically.
Where along the way did you actually say, okay, I'm going to have to move in from being a supporter of Jeremy Carpin to I'm going to have to fill these shoes myself, or try to fill these shoes myself?
So Jeremy had a really strong showing in 2010 for a third-party candidate who didn't raise a lot of money and just sort of worked the grassroots. He had, I think, 35% of the vote, which, if I recall, is the highest third-party candidate vote total in history of Illinois, I think. I mean, it's really impressive. And a lot of the folks who were involved in his campaign wanted to sort of continue the fight for better representation here in the neighborhood. And I talked with Jeremy, and he decided he wanted to move on from electoral politics anyhow. And And I started having conversations with folks who I had met in the sort of progressive political community covering different races. And one of the folks I met originally on Jeremy's race, but then I talked to her later when she was working for a great progressive aldermanic candidate just a few months later in the 2011 municipals, was a young woman named Rebecca Reynolds. She's now the executive director of a group called Chicago Votes, which is this amazing nonprofit that is getting young people involved in the electoral process around the city. But Rebecca is just an incredible organizer and an incredible woman, and very, very impressive. Anyone who's met her will tell you. And I started having conversations with her, and she's very passionate about this community. And when I suggested to her that I had thought about getting involved in politics in some way, she was very excited about the opportunity to sort of continue this fight. And she ended up being my campaign manager in 2012, and was just an absolutely invaluable asset to our campaign.
Is there anything that you've seen or found out about Chicago or Illinois politics that surprised you, or that you didn't expect coming here from North Carolina?
Yeah, well, Illinois politics certainly has a reputation, and I think in many ways it's true, and I've seen firsthand how ugly it can be at times. But I think I'm also struck by the incredible, profound desire among people in Chicago and around the state for politics to be better. That I think there's really just a sense that the sort of corruption and the nepotism and the insider politics has just, at this point, is just bankrupt, and it's just absolutely failed us. And when I go door to door, every night I'm out there knocking on doors and talking to our neighbors, and there's a deep frustration. Absolutely, people are angry with their politicians. They don't come around. They don't listen to us. They don't fight for us. They're taking the side of the big corporation and leaving us out to dry. But people are also very ready to get on board. When I show up and say, listen, I think we deserve better, and I think we need elected officials who are accountable and who are responsive and who are coming out and listening to you and fighting for the community. People get excited about that, and people who I meet at the door show up that next Saturday here in the office to come volunteer for us, and they want to build this movement with us. So I think the optimism, the fundamental optimism of people in this city about the possibility for better politics is something that's really impressed me.
I know a job drew you to Chicago, but were there any things that you were looking forward to in coming to Chicago?
Sure. I came here with a couple of friends from college, and they were friends whom, this is maybe a thing that folks don't know about Guzzardi, to answer your first question finally. They were friends whom I did improv comedy with in college. And Chicago, of course, is like the world's great improv city. And so we studied together at the I.O., the famous improv theater over on Clark Street, and I performed there for a few years when I first got here. So that was something that was a really wonderful part about being in Chicago.
Do you still think about going up on stage, or have you recently?
It has been a while since I performed, but it was funny because one of my classmates at I.O. Was a young woman named Cecily Strong, who I turned on the TV 6 months ago, and she's the newest cast member at SNL.
So that's where they come from.
Yeah, it's really amazing. The life that could have been.
When you go out to have a night out and just chill out and relax around the neighborhood or around Chicago, where do you go? What kind of things do you like to do? I
was just talking to a friend about this last night, actually, that the great thing about living in Logan Square is you just never have to leave because there's, so many great restaurants here, and places to go out and socialize, and movie theaters and everything else, and I have a ton of friends who live in the neighborhood, of course, and so it's really easy.
But I'm sure you like to get up to Portage Park too, right?
Of course. It's actually that's been one of the neat things about this campaign, and last one too, is learning these other neighborhoods. I feel a pretty deep connection to Logan Square. I've lived here for many years now, and I have a lot of friends here and know a lot of the businesses here and everything else. But being out walking around, knocking on doors in Belmont Green, in Portage Park, I found some really amazing places in those neighborhoods. I've really gotten to know them, and those neighborhoods have such tremendous character of their own, each of them. And that's been really fun. That's been a blast, and especially up in Portage over at the Six Corners. There's a lot of small business coming in that area and really trying to revitalize up there. And yeah, it's been really remarkable to learn the community.
If you were elected, what one or two issues would voters see a difference in your legislative tactics compared with Tony Berrios?
That's a very good question. I think the two biggest issues on which my opponent and I have sort of major philosophical differences are our approach to the state's economy and to public education. On the economy, my opponent has a consistent track record of voting in the interests of the biggest corporations in our state, voting for hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks for those guys, and passing the burden on to working families in our community, whether it's by raising our income taxes or raising our utility rates, or voting to allow speeding cameras and red light cameras to sort of nickel and dime working people. So that's an issue on which we have a pretty big distinction. I think it's really important for us to have a balanced economy in which the wealthy and the big corporations are held accountable to paying their fair share, and the burden gets lifted off the backs of working families, that folks who are struggling right now to get by have some of that burden eased. And as far as schools go, that's another issue again on which we come to from pretty different places. I think my opponent has been a big supporter of expanding charter schools. My opponent has supported vouchers, which would take public dollars out of our neighborhood schools and give them to private schools. And I think that's just not the right approach. I think our neighborhood public schools need more resources. They need more investment from our state. And we have an obligation to the children in our community to provide a great education at our neighborhood public schools, schools that are accessible to every child. It's an obligation that we're not meeting right now, and it's going to require real, meaningful commitment from our state to meet it. And the Chicago Teachers Union and the Illinois Federation of Teachers and the Illinois Educators Association, the three big teachers unions in the state, have all lined up behind my campaign because they really believe that I'm going to be an advocate for this issue.